Another game that we're talking about is an SEC West game between number 13 LSU and number 20 Ole Miss. And the storyline really, Dalton, is pretty simple. It's which team can get back on track, because last week Ole Miss lost to Alabama. Right now, LSU and Ole Miss are 2 of 4 teams that are still in the top 20, even though they already have a loss. Alabama, of course, one of the other ones, and Oregon State, who we already talked about, is another one of them too. LSU lost its first game of the season against now number 5 Florida State. So the winner of this game proves that it's a legitimate contender in the SEC this season. The loser is definitely falling out of the top 25 and has an uphill battle the rest of the year. What is the matchup that you're watching in this game, though, Dalton?
It's a couple of things. I think starting out, we need to see if Ole Miss can rebound. That game against Alabama. That was rough. I mean, yeah. Bama coming off of all of the controversy that they were from the previous week, and at Ole Miss, that was the lowest graded game overall that they played under Lane Kiffin. It just, they couldn't find big plays. They didn't complete a deep ball. Judkins, I believe, only had 56 yards or so. Nothing was in sync. And, you know, we talked about Monday. I thought they came out with the wrong game plan defensively, but that's also just kind of how they run their defense. It's 3-3-5, sit back, don't get thrown all over. It's kind of this thing where they'll let you run the ball. And I don't always, you know, against a team like Alabama, I don't think you want to do that. But that was honestly, by some metrics, the worst game they've played under Lane Kiffin, and how they're going to go home and rebound now against the team that beat them by 3 touchdowns last year. This is a massive game. This is now the second biggest game remaining in the SEC West, other than when LSU is going to go play Bama. I got 2 teams right here, first of all, that are not covering well at all. They are giving up deep shots. They're both in the bottom 5 in the SEC in deep coverage grade. LSU is by far the worst coverage grade in the SEC right now. I think by almost 10 points, so 62 points. We're not used to this with LSU. I mean, we're used to them being DBU, Patrick Peterson, Jamal Adams, Tyrann Mathieu, and Derek Stingley. They don't have that in the secondary right now. They're giving up big plays. There's a big contrast right now between LSU giving up big plays and Ole Miss coming off a game where they hit no deep shots, not a single completed pass over 20 yards in the air. I'm curious to see if Ole Miss can find the rhythm again in the passing game, because if they can't make plays over the top, the holes are going to continue to close for Judkins, and everything's going to continue to look clunky. On the other side, Ole Miss not covering the deep ball well. I believe it might be the worst. It's the worst in the SEC, I think it is. Somewhere around a 42. Look, Malik Neighbors is raging hot.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he's hit a gear where you might call him the best receiver in the country. He's just, him and Daniels, they have that thing going right now where those 2 guys alone, really last week they did, those 2 guys alone can win them ball games. I'm curious to see which team's secondary is going to hold up on the back end, especially deep. And then you got an LSU secondary. We'll go to them for a second. Giving up 9 touchdowns, the most in the SEC. Missed 19 tackles, the most in the SEC. A lot of issues for both teams on the back end. I'm curious to see who's going to make the big plays.
Absolutely, and not only Malik Neighbors. I mean, he had 8 catches for 130 yards and 2 scores last week against Arkansas. Brian Thomas, man, has really emerged as that number 2 receiver in that LSU offense. He had 5 catches for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns against Arkansas last week, averaging almost 27 yards per catch, man. He has been a great deep threat for LSU. And like you mentioned, both secondaries are struggling right now. And my matchup mainly that I'm watching, besides LSU on offense, is Ole Miss's passing attack. Because, yes, it didn't look great against Alabama, but then again, Alabama's a really good secondary, as we talked about extensively before. Ole Miss, with Lane Kiffin calling the shots, is usually always going to have a really damn good passing game, and they have that this year. 81.4 offensive grade on passing plays this season, which is 10th among Power 5 schools. Jackson Dart, 89.1 grade this season, which is 3rd among SEC quarterbacks. Also, most importantly, in my opinion, last week against Alabama, the guys that we mentioned who were hurt and banged up in that Ole Miss receiving core, Caden Prieskorn in the tight end, Zachary Franklin in wide receiver, and wide receiver Trey Harris, all three of them played against Alabama last week. So Ole Miss finally has a healthy receiving core. That is a problem because, as you put it so well, LSU, the issue with that defense is the secondary, which we had a feeling that would be going into the season. 62.5 coverage grade, 7th worst in the Power 5 right now. The way for LSU, in my opinion, to slow down this passing game is to get pressure on Jackson Dart. Ole Miss right now is kind of a middle-of-the-pack offensive line in terms of pass blocking grade, and the way for LSU to get consistent pressure is something that we keep talking about. Let Harold Perkins rush the freaking passer, man. This guy is one of the best pass rushers in the country, and yet he's only rushed the passer on 40% of his passing plays this season. The other 60% he's spent in coverage as an off-ball linebacker, and the comparison I want to keep bringing to the table to just kind of contextualize how insane that is imagine if the Dallas Cowboys put Micah Parsons in coverage on most of the passing plays. That's malpractice. This is what they're doing with Harold Perkins right now. It's an issue, and with that coverage unit struggling so much for LSU, they need Harold Perkins to make an impact in this game. So I think this is the game. Brian Kelly, this is the game. Unleash him, man. Finally, pin his ears back. Let him go. Let him see ball, get ball, as you said. I am really struggling to see why they're not rushing Harold Perkins so much when he is one of the best pass rushers in the country, man. And they're putting him in coverage on most of his snaps. So I don't understand that. But, yeah, man, I think that's the key, I think, for LSU in this game is just let Perkins rush the passer. Ultimately, though, Dalton, who do you have coming out on top, and who is maybe the biggest challenger to Alabama in the SEC West this season?
I think you make a great point on Perkins, but especially look, if LSU is going to struggle with him in coverage anyway, then just rush the passer. Just go ahead and send the dogs because and try to speed up the quarterback's clock and all that stuff. I think it's LSU. Okay. Ole Miss. The big thing for me, as always, when if I'm playing LSU, even more than Neighbors and Thomas, and you have to find a way to contain Jaden Daniels. And last year he ran for 137 yards on Ole Miss. Ole Miss just struggles. The way their defense is designed, they struggle with quarterback run. 3-man front, they kind of don't really set a wide edge like that. Big-time problems when there's either a design quarterback run or kind of a read option worked in there. Their run defense grade is 120th in the country. The way their defense is designed and the way they react to it, quarterback run is just always going to be an issue. It wasn't like a huge issue last week against Alabama. Milroe had a couple big runs, but it just the style of play on their defense is not conducive to stopping Jaden Daniels. And now if Neighbors is going to play like this and he's got a two-way go, I'm not sure how Ole Miss's defense holds up the way that they play it. Looking at it again last year, that was just the biggest theme is they can't catch Daniels, and their defense isn't designed schematically to help with that. It kind of they would have to really drastically change their defense, and they're not going to do it. They would rather just line up the way they line up, and it's funny because their defense is designed with 5 on the back end constantly to not give up big shots. And yet they do anyway. So I'm really not sure if Neighbors and Daniels, especially in the passing game, are going to play like this, how Ole Miss is going to stop LSU. I'm going to take LSU 41-31.
Okay.
I'm just having a hard time, and it could be worse than that. If LSU's defense plays a little better, or if these Ole Miss receivers can't get in a rhythm, it could be worse. I know the game is at Ole Miss, but there's some issues rhythmically with their offense, and their defense is just not designed to stop Jaden Daniels at all. It feels like unless they change something, he's just going to have free reign. I mean, we learned last week it's not like they're going to blitz, apparently, in big spots. Yeah. So if they just sit back and play the same style of defense they do, I'm not sure how Daniels doesn't have success because he's not going to turn the ball over. He doesn't do that. So I don't know what exactly their plan is for Jaden Daniels. They didn't have one last year, and I haven't seen anything different from their defense this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that Ole Miss secondary even struggled with Alabama last week. And we've gone over extensively how much Alabama's passing game has struggled so far this season. Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Mason Taylor at tight end. That's a different animal, man. It's a different animal that you're dealing with. I got LSU in this game as well. I think it's going to be close, though, because I don't trust Brian Kelly to let Harold Perkins rush a passer again. I'm not expecting that. And I do think LSU's secondary is vulnerable with Jackson Dart and all those healthy receivers that he finally has now. I think it could turn into a shootout. Ultimately, I got LSU in a close one, though, 34-31. But this, to me, was the hardest game to predict because I can really see Ole Miss pulling out the upset here. But I'm taking, two of the best quarterbacks in the SEC in this game, I think, between Jaden Daniels and Jackson Dart. And it could turn into a game where it's between Jaden Daniels and Jackson Dart going blow for blow. I would trust Daniels in that receiving core a little bit more in this game than I would Jackson Dart. So I'm taking LSU 34-31 in this one. I think it will be a really, really close game, though.